Yeah, let him. He came in first. Go on.
Hiya.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Peace with you.
What kind of space do you think there is for atheists around the country who celebrate Christian values?
Yep.
Ones that don't have the supernatural element, but still have moral teachings.
Yeah.
Suppose, for example,
Thank you.
just to extend my question a bit,
Go on.
suppose the churches did fill up,
Yep.
but not with Christians per se, but cultural Christians
Yeah.
who don't believe the supernatural parts,
Yep.
but do
Believe in the values.
believe in the values and want to celebrate and promote those values.
Yeah.
Where are you on that?
So the thing, I guess, are you one of those people?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I have an interest in Buddhism,
Okay.
and they are
Maybe we'll
atheists-
come on to that.
atheists, basically.
Yeah.
But
Theravada Buddhism, definitely.
yes,
Yeah.
in reading around and the works of Tom Holland,
Yeah.
I don't think he's a historian, but
He
he's
is a historian.
he's a writer for sure. I don't know if he's
Anyway, let's come to the question. I get where you're coming from. Yeah.
His ideas are that Britain is a Christian.
Yeah, I know his ideas.
Okay.
Let me answer your question.
Yeah.
So in answer to your question, the thing is, I don't think that a lot of people appreciate that your values emerge from your doctrines. The doctrines that you have will give rise to your values.
Right.
And so this whole experiment of having Christian morality whilst not believing in Christian doctrine is exactly an experiment that we've already run through. We've done this experiment. We did it from the 1790s onwards. And from 1760s, the Enlightenment.
Right.
That was an attempt to have Christian morality without Christian doctrine. And the further we've gone down that road, the more we've lost sight of the doctrine that gave rise to the values, and the more we've lost the values that we appreciate. And I think that many people who want to have Christian values but not Christian doctrine, what they want is liberalism with some Christian sprinkles.
Basically.
Right. That's not Christianity. And so Christianity is that me and my brothers around us, we form a covenant people of God. We're in covenant with God to be his holy priests and for him to be our God. Which means that our covenant with him and our belief about what our story is as his priests, offering up our souls and bodies to be a living sacrifice, to bring God's kingdom from heaven to earth by that sacrifice, gives us different values than liberalism, right?
Okay.
Now, there is some synergy, there is some overlap, right? And where that overlap is, if you're willing to stand with us, then great, there's a place for you in the Christian worldview. It's called people of goodwill. But for you to stand with us, that would mean you'd be against the euthanasia bill that's going through Parliament right now. You'd be against abortion, that you'd be against divorce and for the family, that you would want the family to be defined legally as between one man and one woman in holy matrimony, that you would be in favour of a blasphemy law, and I don't think, yes, of course, I don't think many people who want to stand with Christians really understand what Christianity is all about. They want a liberal form of Christianity.
Who is determining what Christianity is all about?
That's a great question. The people that determine what Christianity is all about are the apostles,
Right.
and their teachings,
Okay.
right? So it's not a democracy. It isn't a decision that we get to make collectively. We have to read the apostolic tradition. We have to come to an understanding of the apostolic tradition. And insofar as we understand it, we have to embody it. Yeah? Now, the reason why, for instance, a blasphemy law would be something important is because if you don't defend the doctrines that give rise to your values, and you allow those doctrines to be attacked and mocked and destroyed, you end up losing those doctrines, and then you lose the values that are built on them.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, I'm hearing that.
And the thing is, our liberal society is the mess that it's in precisely because of liberalism. So just trying to rewind the clock a couple of decades is not actually going to fix the problem. Right? What I would invite people like you to do is to radically see that what we need is a new Christendom. Not a 1950s liberalism, but a new Christendom.
So where blasphemy law curtails free speech,
Yes.
do you see that as a loss of intellectual development, where, you know, the more pluralistic the ideas coming in are then sorted hypothesis by hypothesis, which require that freedom of speech, including the freedom to mock, the freedom to offend, as you will, whoever takes offence. Those are the conditions to maximise intellectual growth, and with that science and technology and all of that. Do you see a loss of intellectual development where blasphemy law steps in?
So blasphemy laws could sit on a spectrum. I wouldn't necessarily go along with blasphemy laws, peace with you, brother, that protect, you know, for instance, got to keep that. That protect, for instance, the Pope from criticism, or the bishops from criticism, or the church from criticism. I think it's actually healthy. The Reformation taught us this. It's actually healthy for those in authority to be subject to criticism for their behaviour.
Of course.
And so there would be things like freedom of the press. And there would certainly, in terms of science and technology, complete freedom, because they don't make discourse about God's existence or the sanctity of Christ or any of the doctrines. They're talking about material things. So they would have complete freedom. The kind of things where a blasphemy law would take effect, I mean, assuming that it was a blasphemy law written by me, right, this would be my version of a blasphemy law, would be in any state function or any group or institution that receives state money or any public land, the Christian faith could be not mocked or ridiculed. It could be criticised, it could be argued against, but it couldn't be mocked, it couldn't be ridiculed.
I can see some grey area in that.
Yeah, of course, and they'd have to be worked out within the courts. Yeah, so again, no blasphemy would be allowed in schools if they're receiving state money. But if it's a private institution, your own business, for instance, well, because you're not receiving any statement, unless you've got a government contract, in which case you'd have to accept the blasphemy law. But if you're not doing business with a state, and you were just doing business with other private citizens, then you should be free to say whatever you want.
So this means
So it would be a limited blasphemy law.
And it would be a blasphemy law only towards
Christianity. Exclusively towards Christianity.
Gosh, that would involve a whole load of restructuring of equality.
The
idea of equality across the board.
Dump all that shit. Dump the all crap. Dump it all. Right? All of that liberal progressive nonsense of intersectionality and of building identity on ethnicity and ability and sexuality, and it's all a load of rubbish.
I mean, there are some classical liberals who are against progressivism.
Agreed.
I wouldn't put them...
No, I know.
I know they're related.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
One might be a pathology, you might say, of classical liberalism.
Yeah. Classical liberalism has given birth to cults in its 200 years of existence. So, fascism, Nazism, communism and progressivism are all cults of liberalism.
Okay, interesting. So are those the main problems with what liberalism has become in your view?
Yeah, so what is the problem with what liberalism has become?
In your view, yes.
Yeah, it's the idolatry of the self. It's the worship of the self. It's the worship of the self as God, as self-defining, as something that cannot be questioned or critiqued or criticised. This is a movement that occurred after World War II, when the paradigm of nationalism collapsed because of 2 world wars back to back. And then what happened was this obsession with self emerged as a replacement to the national story.
Do you think that's potentially an outgrowth of protection of the individual against the state, as in individual liberty, where you're judged before a court of law, you're not judged as a collective identity, you're judged as an individual? Because I think if you went to court, for example, you would prefer to be judged as an individual rather than part of
I mean,
the group.
to be honest, I actually have no confidence in the British courts anymore.
But in principle,
in practice,
if it's sloppy.
In principle, I would want to be judged on my individual actions, not part of any group action. But let's be clear. Everything about liberalism is a distortion of Christianity anyway. It's all built on natural theology. Natural theology emerges from a Christian milieu. Right? You look at all the earliest Enlightenment philosophers, and they're all making arguments based on natural theology. That natural theology would not have existed unless Christendom had given birth to it. Now, that's where modernity's gone wrong. That's where the Enlightenment's gone wrong, is that it is built on the scaffolding rather than on the foundation. What we as a Western civilization need to do is get back to the foundation of our civilization. And the foundation of our civilization is the apostolic teaching.
That's right, Tom.
Right? That's where we need to go to correct the many faults that have emerged because of liberalism.
So in this Christendom that you see, what would happen in terms of individual liberty in a court, for example? Would that principle still be there?
Yeah, because that is a Christian... the idea of habeas corpus and the Magna Carta.
Right.
You know what the Magna Carta is?
Yes.
Right.
I don't know about the
that emerged. That emerged from a Christian civilization. It happened in the 12th century.
Yeah.
It didn't come out of the Enlightenment. You go to Lincoln Cathedral, you go see the Magna Carta. It's a medieval document. So these ideas of the protection of the individual from the king is a Christian idea. It emerges from Christianity. The idea of individualism emerges from Christian spirituality. It emerges from Christian theology. When you read the Gospels, what do the Gospels say? He who does not reject mother or father or brother or sister and for my sake is not worthy of me.
Right.
The whole point of the Christian faith, it was an insurgent movement that erupted into a pre-existing paradigm and pulled individuals in to create a new people, the body of Christ. That means that right there in that movement, you have the birth of the individual. And then through things like the sacrament of confession, which is this idea that I go to a priest and take personal responsibility for my sins and tell him about my conscience and what my conscience has convicted me of, is another thing that cultivates the idea of the individual. The idea that we're all made in the image of God. These are all the doctrinal sources of individualism. The problem with modernity is that it overemphasizes the individual to the exclusion of the collective. As a Christian, I would offer a correction to that, which is that, yes, I'm an individual, but I am a part of the body of Christ.
Do you think liberalism can't achieve that?
Yes, it can't.
Principle?
It tried to do it through nationalism.
Okay.
So what happened in modernity is that the idea of the church was replaced by the idea of the nation state. But the problem with that is that you then made the parliament or the king or, the president in America's case, because America was born in the 1760s, the highest authority, or the Senate, that combination of the tripart system in America. Like that, you made that the highest authority, which meant that the moment you made that the highest authority, you made man his own God. And you can trace out the idea of making man his own God in the nation state to the idea of making man his own God in the individual of liberal progressivism. And so one leads to the other, right? What we need is for man to function well, he must submit to an authority that is above himself in all areas. which means that the Parliament and the King must submit to God. That's why the Christian system that replaced the Roman system was better than the Roman system, because the Roman system had Caesar as God, whereas the Christian system said that there is a God above Caesar. And this is the great education that the Christian faith gave to the Judeo-Christian faith gave to the Western world and to the Roman world and to every world it's ever influenced, that there's an authority above the king, that there is an allegiance above your ethnos, your tribe, that there is an allegiance above you as an individual, that there is something above us that we must give ourselves to. Liberalism can't give us that because it doesn't have the doctrines for it, whereas Christianity has the doctrines for it.
So in this Christendom, you couldn't ridicule or mock Christianity.
Yeah. You shouldn't be allowed to.
You shouldn't be allowed to, but can you criticise it?
Yeah, you can make arguments on things like, for instance, textual criticism.
Okay.
You know, like discussion about the documentary evolution of the Bible, or on particular dogmas of the church, like, for instance, did the idea of the Vatican and the idea of the supremacy of the Pope emerge at the time of Peter, or was it there emerging historically in the 4th century?
So, but in this, otherwise, if someone under this blasphemy law didn't ridicule or mock, but they are spreading questioning of the existence of God itself, what should happen to them?
So if they're doing that in their own private time, in their own private sphere, well, that would depend. It would depend upon the way that they do it. It would depend upon the way that they do it.
But not ridiculing.
Yeah, if they weren't ridiculing,
how else could they get in trouble if by style,
by style. So yeah. It would be things like saying gratuitously offensive things about Christ or about God. You know, like
so
if they, these kind of blasphemies. It's a blasphemy law, which
in terms of civil, rational discussion.
Yeah, if someone was coming here and saying, no, if they're coming here and they're asking questions like, you know, how can I know that God exists?
But also countering with arguments.
Yeah, then those kinds of discussions would be acceptable, because as Christians we believe in evangelism, and you can't evangelize people if you stifle them from having the conversation in the first place.
That's from the Christian's point of view, the evangelist's point of view, but from the skeptic's point of view, they could argue against the existence of God
if they did it in a non-blasphemous way.
You're loading it though.
Well, but this is the point. Is a blasphemy law means that there should be restrictions. But I mean, we're talking about a blasphemy law written by Bob the MP of Parliament, right?
Sure.
Right. We're not necessarily, and that may not be the form that a blasphemy law takes.
Yes.
Because I believe that there's, you know, blasphemy laws can sit on an extreme spectrum, and some Christians might even argue that questioning the idea of God's existence shouldn't be done publicly.
That's where I'm coming from.
But the point is, look at where freedom of speech has gotten us, right? Freedom of speech has done lots of good things in the classical liberal exchange, but what it has led to is where we are. It has led to the degeneracy.
It still feels quite free to me where we are now.
But we're losing that freedom, and you know we are.
Sure, there are threats to it, yes.
Threats coming from all of the establishment political parties, from Islam. I would consider myself a threat to that freedom of speech as well. Like, I'm not a liberal. I'm a Christian. I don't believe in liberalism. I believe in Christianity.
Change your mind about the threats, the value of free speech as one of the most important things.
It is definitely mine is a limitation on freedom of speech connected to blasphemy.
Yes.
It's connected to mocking and ridicule and gratuitous, offensive. You know, how is our society made better? By sticking a crucifix in a vat of piss and then calling it art.
I don't think anyone is saying it's better.
But there are people that do argue that it is better. How was the Jerry Springer opera an improvement to Western civilization?
That's not my position.
Well, but that's the point. In freedom of speech, the advocates, the hypocritical advocates of the freedom of speech,
Yes.
and I suspect you're probably not one of the hypocrites,
Okay.
but the hypocritical defenders of freedom of speech said that sticking a crucifix in a vat of piss and the Jerry Springer opera were all good, but showing cartoons of Muhammad, that's bad. And the BBC took
I don't agree with
I know you don't. I could tell you don't. The BBC took that exact editorial line, right? Because the liberals are governed by fear, which is another reason why Christianity is better than liberalism. Because liberals are scared. Liberals are scared of losing their comforts, their careers, their reputations, and they're also scared of losing a society that allows them to continue living life of comfort. We as Christians, because we follow Christ, we're not frightened of persecution, we're not frightened of suffering, and we're not frightened of sacrifice. And that is exactly the kind of spirit that the West needs right now, but liberalism doesn't give it those doctrines.
You talk about muscular Christianity.
Yeah, and that's what I'm not calling you to embrace Christianity light. I want you to embrace full fat, full blooded, 100% Christianity.
I'm hearing that.
Yeah?
Have you heard of a guy called Jonathan Rauch?
No.
He's a writer. He wrote
Right.
a book called The Constitution of Knowledge.
Yeah.
He wrote a very early book called The Kindly Inquisitors, which
Yeah.
is all about free speech.
Yeah.
As a seminal idea in the West,
Yeah.
and how free speech isn't enough.
Yeah.
You need structure to public conversation.
Yeah.
Otherwise, free speech without structure turns into Twitter, chaos and mess, and
Yeah.
the gratuitousness that you talk about. But the structure in terms of our norms and institutions are what keep the, let's say, the flow of ideas healthy. I
Yeah.
hope I don't paraphrase or mischaracterize. But the universities, the government, law and journalism are four institutions he names,
Yep.
which should in principle practice things like disconfirmation. You know, anyone's hypothesis is
Yeah.
fair game for other disprovers.
Yeah.
Objectivity, pluralism, all of these, even though, you know, in the universities, Harvard is a good example.
Yeah.
It's going to shit.
Yeah.
And there's so much social censorship.
But don't you understand is that when you elevate freedom of speech to the highest level, you actually create the very conditions by which it collapses and degenerates. Because if you just say you can say anything, right? Man's natural tendency is to gravitate to the bottom, right? The lazy thinking is the thinking that people tend to adopt.
Okay.
We see that in the church. Christians have got their own examples of lazy thinking.
Yeah.
All the world's problems can be solved if we just preach the gospel, or all the world's problems can be solved if we just say another rosary or another Jesus prayer rope, right?
Okay.
Every group of people have the tendency to slide and to dumb things down, right?
Yeah.
And the problem is if you start off with the premise that there's no truth and that we have to just discover the truth, firstly, you've got to decide upon a methodology to do that, which the rationalists chose as rationalism and the empiricists chose as empiricism. But the problem with that is that these two epistemologies don't have sufficient scope to identify truth in its completeness, right?
A lot of statements there.
Yeah, and so it leads to free speech without a higher set of values. Free speech, as it were, created in a vacuum, which it never exists anyway, leads to the kind of degeneration of generations that we've seen in the West. You go from liberalism down through classical liberalism into progressive liberalism, and it can't sustain epistemologically its own worldview. It collapses into relativism.
Oh, I wouldn't agree with that.
Yes, it does.
How does it collapse?
It collapses into relativism because free speech is just this ability that everyone should say anything, right?
Fine.
And in the conflict of ideas, the truth will emerge.
Okay.
Right.
Roughly speaking, yeah.
But the point is, you then have to decide that the epistemology is separate from the free speech. In other words, there was no...
That's the constitution of knowledge argument.
Yeah.
The structure, which is the epistemology part, that needs to be in place as well as the free speech.
Right.
When he wrote his first book, which was purely about free speech as a public good that we can't do without, later on he said, I've realised that that's not enough, as you're saying.
Yeah.
We need the structure through the institutions, the main institution of which is the university and higher education. To get that intellectual discipline, the hunger, the lack of lazy thinking, but training out of lack of lazy.
Yeah, but all of the universities that you point to were founded by the church. You see, it's the church.
Fine.
It's the church that created the universities.
That's fine.
And so the primary institution has to be the church. And yes, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be debate within the church.
Yes.
I'm not saying there shouldn't be debate within society.
Yes.
I'm not saying that ideas shouldn't be tested.
But you do want curbing around.
But I do want curbing around a certain kind of criticism of Christianity and a certain kind of gratuitous attack against Christianity, the kind that was done by Voltaire, for instance.
Okay.
And the reason for that, and this is the bit you've got to understand, right? The reason why God in his wisdom forbade blasphemy and why no Christian can go back on that idea, because that would mean that we're saying God was wrong. The reason why...
Then you're in a bind.
No, not really. The reason why... Because I do believe in a blasphemy law. I don't believe in complete free speech. I'm not a liberal. I'm a Christian.
You would otherwise be in a bind.
Yeah, I would otherwise be in a bind. Exactly. You got it. So is that... We're just having a conversation. Yeah, fuck off. In terms of... You got to watch for the wannabe jihadis. Yeah? You just got to watch for the wannabe jihadis.
No.
So, the reason why God in his wisdom gave a blasphemy law is because of humans' nature to be titivated by his passions and to be ruled by his passions. If you can excite a man's passion through mocking and ridicule and gratuitous offensiveness and shock and desensitize him to the sacred, he loses sight of the doctrines from which his values emerge. And the moment we lose those values, we've lost everything. And that's exactly where we've ended up in the West.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't mind people pushing against Christianity intellectually, because such a debate strengthens Christianity.
The issue with that, I hear the logic that you're putting across.
Right.
The issue with that is, presumably you'd think mocking, satirizing, I don't know about insult per se, because it's not particularly civil, is it? But satire and ridicule and mocking, can those be directed at other things?
Yes, absolutely.
That's where there seems to be the inconsistency. Of course, you're advocating Christianity and you're saying the blasphemy law should stop those uncivil attacks, maybe we can call it.
Do you understand why? Because of man's tendency to be subject to his passions.
To degenerate afterwards.
Yes. The thing is, you're coming to me and saying, I want to stand with the church to uphold Christian values because I recognise that there was something good contributed by Christianity, right?
Pretty much.
Well, firstly, my first question to you is, do you actually understand what Christian values are? And my second question to you is, do you understand how we get our values in the first place? Because the moment you attack the doctrines, you cut away at the branch you're sitting on. Right? That's literally what we've done in the West. We've cut away at the branch we're sitting on.
And just to check, because we haven't actually checked explicitly, you think certain of those branches aren't separable to Christianity, such as love thy neighbour?
Yes.
A liberal...
no, it's Christian.
Person. No, hang on. A liberal person, you're saying, couldn't do that without Christianity?
A liberal person, right? No one in the West has the understanding of love thy neighbour except through Christianity. That's where that idea came from in Western civilization.
Why is it not separable as a value to practice?
Right. The reason why because on what are you basing the idea of the dignity of each individual that you love?
Do you need that basis?
Well, yes, you do, of course.
Why is that?
Well, I'll give you an example. Just look at societies that had different doctrines. So different doctrines existed in Nazi Germany. They didn't believe in love thy neighbor because they believed in Aryan supremacy. Remember, when Jesus told the story of love thy neighbor as thyself, then the next question that came in that passage is, yes, good teacher, but who is my neighbor? And Jesus goes on to tell a parable in which he picks the Samaritan, the other ethnos, the non-Jew, as the good neighbor, right? Now that's why, as Christians, we understand the love thy neighbor thing to be to love according to the need, regardless of any other factor, right? Now, if you don't have that doctrine of Jesus' understanding of love thy neighbor, then you can say that your neighbor is only other Aryans like me,
So
not the Jews. No, what I'm saying is your doctrines give rise to your values.
But what's to stop someone who's not a Christian saying, I really like what Jesus said there, I'm going to practice that,
Yes.
and not twist it into only loving Aryans or whatever?
Yep.
Is that...
But this experiment is exactly what we've tried since the 1790s. That's exactly where humanism emerged from.
Are you saying that it's possible in principle, but in practice it's been a terrible result?
I am saying that what you're talking about is exactly what humanism was built on.
Right.
That's humanism.
Yeah.
That's what humanism is.
Yes.
It's this idea that all human beings have a dignity, and we should treat all people equally, and we should love everyone like ourselves. That's humanism.
Yeah.
But the problem with that humanism is at some point you've got to ask the obvious question: what makes you a human? How do you define what a human is? And the moment you do that, the Nazis give one answer, the communists give a different answer, the liberal progressives give a different answer, and so liberal progressives hate the idea that you might wipe out all Jews because they're Jewish, but they're happy to kill tens of millions of babies. And now the liberal progressives are even arguing, now the liberal progressives are even arguing that those who are elderly and suffering and can't contribute to society, let's kill them as well. Right? So, because the point is, if you try to, the problem with love thy neighbor gives rise to humanism. At some point, you've got to answer the question, what makes you human? And depending on how you answer that question, you end up with very different ways of loving your neighbor.
Right. Okay.
So you can't separate it. You can't separate it out, because the moment you separate it out, it stops being what Jesus taught.
And what are you defining as human?
A human is one that has the DNA of a human.
Okay. That sounds separable to Christianity.
No. That is based on Christian teaching.
Okay.
So when, for instance, Mary went to Elizabeth, the third trimester baby of Elizabeth leapt in the womb to hear the voice of Mary, even the baby knew that he was in the presence of his Lord, which was the first trimester baby of Mary. And Christ was named as a human person and described as a human person even before his conception. And scriptures teach that we are knitted together in our mother's wombs.
I'm guessing that you are somewhat familiar with Steven Pinker's work.
Maybe not.
Where he argues for Enlightenment values, which were concentrated during the Enlightenment, not birthed in the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
Which the common themes of which are reason, science, humanism,
Yep.
which results in the progress of today, even though he's very critical of progressives. So the progress in terms of the measurable
Progress accelerated in the Enlightenment, but it wasn't born in the Enlightenment. It's not like we suddenly learnt to build at the Enlightenment.
Of course.
Right? There was a lot of progress before the Enlightenment.
So he's seeing those values as, I think he's seeing them as a sufficient framework for the open society to live in, which is basically one of classical liberalism.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. My issue with that is it doesn't get you into things like love thy neighbour. There's no teaching, because there's no, unless they're just norms of the society, which as a Christian society, that's probably how we've got a lot of the good values that are moral.
That's where all of our values came from. The Enlightenment just...
Can't have been literally every single one.
Not
with many cultures coming in, for example.
No, all of the starting points of the Enlightenment were done either by co-opting or contrasting to the Christendom that came before it.
Yeah.
All of them. 100% of absolutely everything from the Enlightenment was either in contrast to Christendom or a co-option of Christendom. Right? The reason why it's failed is because it's not Christendom. What we need to get back to is Christendom.
What would you say are the top 3 failures of today, then?
Right, the top 3 failures of today.
Yeah.
Right.
Which are the result of liberalism.
Yes, the top 3 failures of today. The overemphasis on the individual.
Okay.
Well, I mean, the top 3 failures, it's kind of, okay.
Or some
right.
of them.
Yeah, I mean, because the thing is, it depends. You could say the top 3 technological, top 3 political, top 3 cultural. Okay, so fundamentally, the primary failure of liberalism is that it replaces God with humanity the center of everything. That is, at core, the heart of the malaise of Western civilization.
Okay.
Right? It is the root of all of our weaknesses. It is the root of all of our failings. Right?
The other failings of which would include...
Right? So building on that is to replace the idea of the covenant people of God, i.e. the church who is in covenant with God, with the idea of the citizen being in covenant with the state.
Okay.
So that's the second big failure of liberalism.
Okay.
So first is to replace God with humanity. Second is to replace covenant relationship, the people of God to God, with the citizen with the state. And the third big failure of modernity is to build on natural theology to the exclusion of revelatory theology. Revelatory theology is that, i.e. the Bible, i.e. building a metaphysical system of morals and values and teloses and goals and so on that have no connection to the Judeo-Christian theology that gave birth to natural theology.
Finally, before I shoot off, regarding these Christianity as the foundation of everything today, are there any key books that you'd recommend to read up upon?
As the foundation of Christianity today, oh my gosh. Do you know, honestly...
As scholarly as possible.
Honestly, bro, off the top of my head, I actually can't think of a single book. No, one book that I could give you, and it'd give you a good theological grounding on everything else that I'm talking about. But it literally is. It's the kind of book that digs out the ground. It doesn't even lay the foundations of what I'm talking about, but it clears the ground for it. Is the writings of N.T. Wright.
N.T. Wright.
Yes, N.T. Wright.
W-R-I-G-H.
Yeah. N.T. Wright, because he talks about the Messiah and the kingdom of God, and the understanding of Christianity as the idea of the kingdom of God being established on earth, which is what sets you up then to think about Christendom.
So N.T. Wright, what was his book called?
He's got loads of books.
Any particular one?
The New Testament and the people of God, I think, would be.
New Testament and people of God.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Let me give you a gift. What's your name, bro?
Toby.
Toby. It was lovely to talk to you, Toby.
It's been a pleasure.
I guess you're one of those people of goodwill. That we were spoken of. So thank you for standing with us. We might yet save Western civilization. You know. If we can do better than we have been doing. Let me just find you a nice gift. Doop. There is a book in here that I've got for you, I'm sure. Where is it? My hands are frozen. Sorry about this. Where is it? One. No.
So you're going for a very particular one.
I am. I've got a very particular book in mind for you. There you go.
Lovely. All right. Merry Christmas.
God bless you.
Happy New Year.
Peace be with you. Merry Christmas. So, yeah, we've got a choice to make in the West, and that choice is very simple. We can either choose to keep following liberalism and watch our society decay because of our liberal elites and their failure, or we can hack our way to another way of building society and civilization, and that would be to build a new Christendom. That's our real choice. That's our real choice, you know?